Thanks
for joining us. I've got a couple of questions about the investigation into the leach tank failure at Ranger, and then a couple about rehabilitation in the area of the Ranger mine. Just quickly, if you can bring us up to date, the leach tank failure incident that occurred in December 2013, there's actually still no concrete information on the nature of the incident and specific details on the response by government to that. Can you tell us, if you know, where the NT government's report or investigation into that accident up to?
Yeah.
Keith Taylor, Acting Assistant Secretary, Supervising Scientist Branch. The Northern Territory Government report remains with their legal counsel. They're unable to release that report until they've determined whether or not that would advance to a prosecution. So at this stage, the report isn't publicly available.
So there's nothing stopping them holding on to that for years, though, is there?
That's correct.
Is there a statute of limitations on prosecuting RA?
There is, under the Northern Territory legislation, but I don't know the number of years off the top of my head. I could take that on notice.
Yeah, if you could. Does the OSS have a copy? Are you in receipt of it?
No.
Okay, so you're in the dark, public's in the dark, local Aboriginal communities in the dark, and the NT government could sit on this forever if they chose to.
As you said, there is a statute of limitations. I'd have to get back to you on the exact time frame.
Can you just jump back to where you started? The reason that you think it's with the legal counsel, and just backtrack to the initial comment that you made. What's your understanding of why the NT government is holding on to that study?
It's the NT government that advised me that the report is with their legal counsel for review. That's a standard step in most organisations. So. If you're moving towards a potential prosecution, you need to provide the report to your legal counsel for review. My advice, or the advice of the Northern Territory Government to me, is that's where that report currently is at the moment.
Okay. So the focus of the government's investigation, understandably, was on process safety. So what's in place now in terms of ongoing monitoring and reporting of the ERA's move to process safety, and how confident are you that I think there are half a dozen of those leach tanks on site. How confident are you that ERA has actually taken steps to prevent such an incident from happening again?
The Northern Territory Government is using an external expert contractor to work with ERA to develop their process safety management system, and we have been involved in that process. ERA has made good progress towards improving their process safety culture and process safety systems. We are provided with the reports from the consultant after his quarterly site visits to ERA. The supervising scientist also has released a report into the environmental effects of that leach tank failure, and ERA has been conducting additional groundwater monitoring and other things since the incident occurred to ensure that there are no off-site impacts. So
I was going to say, so Senator, that's the Supervising Scientist Report 207, which was released on the 28th of August 2014.
But a lot of the heavy lifting was done by the NT government and its investigators. So it's a very large and important body of work that still isn't in the public domain.
That's correct. The Supervising Scientist report focused on the potential for off-site impacts, whereas the Northern Territory Government's report looked at the cause of the failure and the mechanism of the failure.
Okay. So what do you think are the best channels for the public to find out the outcome of that investigation?
It's really a matter for taking up with the Northern Territory Government, Senator.
It's nearly 2.5 years since the incident. Has the federal government, this might be more appropriate through you, Senator Birmingham, have you taken any steps to ask the NT government to expedite the release of that investigation?
I'd have to take that on notice. Senator.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it. I understand an investigation of this nature would take a while to conduct, but I don't feel like it's appropriate that 2.5 years after the event, we're still waiting on the basic story of what occurred. So if you could take that on notice, Senator Birmingham, and advise us whether you propose to take any steps to have that document, or even a redacted copy of it that's been scrubbed, I don't mind, is put into the public domain. Okay, I just want to go to rehab. Where are the OSS and ERA up to in defining closure criteria for the Ranger mine? Because it really looks as though time's running out on that operation.
Senator, defining closure criteria is an ongoing process. ERA provided the supervising scientist with a initial draft report in August last year, and we have reviewed that and provided comments back to ERA. ERA have been allocating additional resources, including engaging groundwater modelers in the US, a company called Enterra, to undertake required research. So it is underway, and some closure criteria will need to be set earlier than others because closure is an ongoing process. It's appropriate to put in indicators and milestones. So there is time to do this in a robust manner, and we are working through closure criteria working groups with ERA to develop the closure criteria. The supervising scientist is also in the process of undertaking a formal review of all the research that it has undertaken to date and prospectively to ensure that we know of any gaps and we can fill those in an appropriate time frame.
All right, great. So just to be clear, a draft set of closure criteria from ERA has been submitted to the OSS. Did you say it was August last?
It was August, and OSS and other key stakeholders, because closure criteria need to be developed in conjunction with a range of stakeholders. Sure. So the Indigenous communities, land councils, etc., have say over the future use of the area, the shape of the final landform, and so there are a number of entities who need to have a look at the closure criteria. Yeah. It's a joint endeavour, although at the end of the day they belong to ERA and they need to be signed off by both the Northern Territory Government and the Commonwealth Industry Minister with the advice of the supervising scientist.
Okay. Is the supervising scientist's advice determinative? If you put a block on it, does that stop the show, or are you just there as advisors?
The supervising scientist, through a range of legal instruments that exist not only under Commonwealth legislation but NT legislation, does have considerable sway over the nature of closure criteria, and not just the criteria, more that the object of closure criteria is to provide for a process where there can be completion and sign-off between the regulating body and ERA so that they can exit from the site at the end of the day.
Regulating body being the NTG in this case, or being your office, the OSS? The powers reside with the Northern Territory and also the Industry Minister, but as I said, under various pieces of legislation, the sign-off, not only the development of the criteria, but the sign-off as to whether they have been met, is on the advice of the supervising scientist. Okay. All right, thank you. So when would you expect, I presume the eventual closure criteria, once they've been completed, will be put into the public domain? They're not going to, there's no reason why they would stay secret, is there?
That would probably be a matter for the Minister for Industry. He will be the final approver of those closure criteria, so it would be up to the Industry Minister whether he chose to release those or not.
Sorry, federal?
The Federal Industry Minister.
Okay. Do you have a working timeline of when that process will be complete? I understand when you say that it's iterative and it bounces back and forth, but when the final closure criteria will be signed off to within the nearest month?
ERA has regularly reviews its closure plan and closure criteria, so it is an iterative process, and they do have a timeline. It's quite a complex document because there are so many different dimensions of closure, all of which have different time frames over time, and the best practice guides that are issued by industry do require that
All right. How about
the
to
closure
nearest
plan is
monthly?
regularly reviewed, and that's the case here.
Yeah. I asked you specifically when you anticipate that process will be concluded.
I couldn't give you an answer at this stage, Senator. As I said, we provided comments on the draft report in August, and we're waiting for an update, and that may indeed have changes to the time frame for finalising closure criteria.
Okay. In what ways are the Mirror traditional owners, either individually or through their representative body, the Gundjamie Aboriginal Corporation, involved in the process of establishing the closure criteria?
The Mirror, through the Gundjamie Aboriginal Corporation, are represented on the Ranger Mine Site Technical Committee, which oversees the closure process.
Yep. They're
represented on the Closure Criteria Working Group, which reports to that Mine Site Technical Committee.
Who convenes the working group?
ERA. They're represented on the technical working groups that are actually developing the specific criteria.
Okay.
And there is a specific working group that deals with cultural issues and trying to bring traditional Indigenous knowledge into modern science and looking at that interface as well. So I guess the views of the Mirror have been embedded throughout the entire process.
Okay, good. Thank you. Can you just confirm for us that ERA's application under the EPBC Act for approval of operations at Ranger 3 Deeps, that expansion that was afoot, has actually been formally withdrawn? Or to put that a regulatory branch, or do you have a read?
You would be better to talk to the Environmental Standards Division about that.
They're coming on a bit later. Mm-hmm. So, but do you know whether it's been withdrawn?
My understanding it hasn't been formally withdrawn.
Hasn't?
No.
Same. Okay. It's my understanding as well. All right. I'll talk to your colleagues a bit later. Just finally, on securities held in relation to the rehab, I understand that these are held in the name of the Department of Industry, but that the issuing of the securities by the banks is subject to the banks assessing ERA's solvency. Can you just step through, or if this is not in your remit, tell us where I should take these questions? How are we to be confident that ERA actually has the ability to fund the full rehabilitation process?
I couldn't comment on the nature of the security bond. You would need to address those questions to the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. I can talk you through the process of establishing the bond, if that's helpful.
The process of what, sorry?
Of establishing the bond.
Okay, I think we've got... is this session running out till 10, Chair?
Sorry?
Does this session run till 10?
It does.
Okay, go ahead.
The bond is based on an annually updated plan of rehabilitation, which is provided by ERA. The supervising scientist does not have expertise in costs. We review the plan for scientific veracity and to make sure that it doesn't miss anything, essentially. Once we have accepted the plan as being achievable and reasonable, it's then passed to the Department of Industry, who employ an independent expert quantity surveyor to assess the costing associated with that plan. So all we do is advise on the likely environmental suitability and the scientific veracity of the plan. The costing is all done by Department of Industry, Innovation and Science.
Okay, I will follow them up a little bit later in the session in that case. Finally, I might have missed this in your opening statement. Is the supervising scientist himself not available this session?
Senator, I'm the supervising scientist.
Congratulations. I was not aware that you'd changed roles. Okay, I'll leave it there.